right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Landers. I am the Assistant Director of Career Services here in the Pamplin College of Business. Thank you all so much for joining for today's career chat. As you may notice, the title is Am I the Problem? Reasons Why You're Not Getting Hired. So, the job search is a complicated process, and I just want to give credit to you all for being here and taking some time for some self-reflection. And we're going to talk a lot about the different aspects of a career search. We're going to cover a lot of different topics. I will share more information about how to get connected to our office at the end. If you want to dive deeper into any of these topics, we'd love to do so. But essentially, what we're going to do today is talk about common mistakes that we see in the job search and how that can sometimes look like maybe the job market isn't reflecting reality, and that makes it tough. But ultimately, here's some tweaks and things that we can change on our end to make you more competitive in the process. And as we have more folks join, I'll have it on the second slide as well. Please sign in for the event check-in if you have not already. The QR code is right there. We'll put it again in the chat. We would greatly appreciate it. But to get started today, I'd love to learn a little bit about what our attendees are struggling with in the job search process. So I've put a couple of options. A, I've submitted tons of applications. B, I can't get past the interview stage. C, I don't know which jobs to apply for. Or D, if there's something else, feel free to put that in the chat too. You can just type A, B, or C, or D if you want to put something more specific, that would be fine as well. But if you guys could just take a moment and give me some feedback, that would be wonderful. Okay. Yep, lots of applications. We know that's a really common problem for students. I don't know which jobs to apply for, I'm seeing as well. Okay. Perfect. Thank you all for that feedback. That really helps kind of guide our conversation today. Okay, and a couple with the interview as well. Okay, great. So again, we're going to talk about all of these things. I'll focus the conversation for sure on A and C because it seems like where that's a lot of the questions are. If you all have questions throughout our conversation today, please feel free to put them in the chat. We do ask that you stay on mute just because we like to record our career chats, but if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer. All right. So first thing I want to say is that this is our post-grad stat that we're really proud of in Pamplin. 90%, and probably likely a little bit more of the students we know of, 90% of our students who are graduating land a job within 6 months of graduation. So I do just want to put your minds at ease a little bit. It feels really impossible a lot of times in the moment, and we certainly have conversations with students where they're defeated. It can be really time consuming and frustrating to put in applications and not see results. But I just like to share that we work really hard in Pamplin to ensure that you have lots of opportunities at your fingertips. We want to work with you really closely if you're struggling. So in addition to attending workshops like today, we'd love to chat with you one-on-one and dive a little deeper into your situation. So don't fret. We will talk about some options to help make you more competitive in the process. And again, please connect with us if you still feel like you have questions after today. All right, so let's dive into what might be happening for you and what you can do about it. So first things first, we're going to dive into, this is a really common problem that we see, and I know some of you shared that you're not sure which jobs to apply to. The best way to determine what's a realistic place for me to apply is by looking at past data. That's really going to be a realistic snapshot. We can talk about where we would like to aspire to. You can absolutely still apply for those places, but in reality, looking at where students have been hired in the past, that's going to be the best indicator of future success. So there's 2 steps that I recommend taking. The first one is to log into Stepping Blocks. So if you haven't heard of Stepping Blocks, it is a new resource that Virginia Tech has acquired for all of our students. This is basically scraping LinkedIn for information on previous students that are not only just a year out, but further along in their career trajectory. So this is pulling what they started in as their degree, what they might have done as an intern, their first couple of positions up until now. So if you're someone who has a very specific end goal in mind, so I've met with some students who say, someday I'd love to be CFO, right? You can look at who is a CFO currently that graduated from Pamplin in the past. What jobs have they had? Where did they start? And that's really what you want to be focusing on. What are the companies that are hiring these types of positions right out of graduation? That's a really good way to kind of direct your focus, especially if you're someone who's like, I am putting in so many applications and just not seeing the results. So I have a QR code on the side for Stepping Blocks. It is a Virginia Tech specific link, so make sure you're going through that. The second step that I recommend is looking at our previous hiring data for both full-time and intern from the recent classes in Pamplin. So this is a snapshot. I just kind of went along with the marketing theme here. You can see very realistic companies and the job titles that have hired. So this is going to help determine your search a little bit, because we can type in marketing into the job search search bar on Handshake all day, but it's not really going to be targeted towards specifically what you know and what your skills are focused on. So I highly recommend looking at this previous data. You don't have to look just solely for these companies, but you certainly should keep in mind what are the realistic job titles. And I do think that there's a lot of students who kind of jump towards the middle of this stepping block data, and that's where they want to start. And I admire that. I think that could be possible, but a more realistic goal is going to be starting at these first entry-level positions that have historically been possible for our students and kind of working your way up from there. Again, I do have the QR code. All of this can be found on our website, which I'll have linked again at the end, but I have a QR code for both the full-time and intern data, and then as well as the stepping block data. All right, another problem we see when you're applying to a ton of different applications and not really seeing results is staying in tune with the job market. So there's two kind of sides to this. The first one is just staying up to date with what's going on in the job market. Are you looking into the correct types of positions that maybe have more opportunities right now? There's a couple ways to do this. Number one is following professionals on LinkedIn. You don't always have to connect right away. I like to say that because sometimes you're looking to connect with a recruiter and they're getting thousands of requests every day. You can just hit follow, and just for a first stepping stone, you can see what they're sharing and what they're updating on LinkedIn. That can be a really helpful way to do it. The other thing is connecting with career services professionals via LinkedIn, but also in an appointment. We can share with you kind of what's going on. We do have access to data and hiring outlooks and different surveys from employers. So we'd love to stay connected with you in addition to those industry professionals who are writing articles and kind of in the know. The second thing I always recommend is podcasts. This is one of my favorite, just for an example, Hard Fork for technology updates. But in general, it's really important, especially in a fast-moving industry like most of our industries are in Pamplin, to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry, what kinds of jobs might be up and coming, which jobs are maybe on the decline. If you're solely looking for specifically, a cybersecurity intern, and right now that market is kind of tight, it might be good to broaden your horizons and look at some other opportunities. So that's why we recommend that. The other thing when it comes to job market is there are a lot of different places to look depending on if you have a very specific goal in mind. So for example, we talked with a lot of students that want to work in sports or athletics. Teamwork Online is the place to look for that. There are going to be some opportunities on Handshake. There might be some on LinkedIn, but Teamwork Online is where I think 90% of the students I found jobs in sports have found them through Teamwork Online. So that's kind of what we're getting at here. Idealist is for nonprofit, higher ed jobs, obviously for higher ed, USA jobs for federal, MedReps is for medical sales. We talked to a lot of students who are looking for that specific industry. So you might need to go above and beyond the standard job search if you are very specific in what you're looking for. And we're happy to support that. But I think it's important to note that the business world is somewhat of a straight path for a lot of our majors. And if you're looking for something slightly different, we may need to adjust our strategy a little bit. So again, high level here, hopefully some of you can take away a couple of these different industries, but if you have something even different from this, we can talk about that if you book with your career advisor. All right, so let's dig into some mistakes in the actual job search process. So one of the things we often see is over filtering. So if you guys are on your laptops right now and you have Handshake open, I'd love for you to take a look at the jobs tab and the different filters that you can apply when you're applying and looking for job applications. We always are going to recommend using the major and the job type. Those are two that are really standard and help narrow it down to keep you looking for things that you'll be actually qualified for. Beyond that, I don't want you to touch too many of the filters. If you're very specific on location, of course you can put location, keep that range as wide as you can. Otherwise, I really would recommend keeping an open mind as far as location. Some companies do offer relocation costs and things like that to support. And also, if you are a younger student in particular, you might want to consider adding grad date, especially for internships. You can leave that pretty open. Full-time, of course, is going to know they're only looking for students that are graduating. So only if you are a younger student and you're looking for something that will take freshmen, for example, you could put in grad date. I really do steer away from using school year because that tends to be a little bit trickier to identify with credits. And when you're graduating, your grad date is going to be the most accurate way. So I would recommend sticking with those 3 or 4. The other thing we see a lot is students who are waiting for a position that they're a perfect match. I'll send some job opportunities their way and they're like, well, I don't have this specific skill, or I don't think I've had enough time in this industry. The industry standard is 60 to 70% of a match. So again, don't apply for something where you're absolutely not qualified in any way, but don't be scared off by certain qualifications or certifications, especially if they're in the preferred section. It is totally okay if you don't meet all of those qualifications, especially if you're someone who is a quick learner and is open to learning new skills. Some things we do want to do, and we see a lot of mistakes happening in this area, is looking at keywords in the job description. A lot of times the title is where some students will stop. And, I think it goes without saying, but the job description is going to dig way further into what you'll actually be doing. So if you were to see a sales role or something like that, does that look like door-to-door? Does that look like a little bit of analytics thrown in there? Does it look like, keeping a book of clients and supply chain? There's a lot of different pieces to something that might be labeled as a sales role. So keep that in mind. Other mistakes we see, not having a voicemail set up or not leaving room in your inbox. This is a really common way for recruiters to want to reach out to you. What we see a lot, and recruiters have told us, if they don't see a phone number, they'll just skip it. They won't say, oh, well, I guess the student prefers email. They'll just skip your entire profile. So it's really important to make sure you have all of that set up. Submitting your resume in PDF form. Again, hopefully that goes without saying. Double check the formatting. Make sure there's not an extra white page at the second page. It should be one page only in PDF form, and it should be saved under your name and the company name. I cannot tell you how many resumes I get for whatever purpose, different applications where they're saved as resume 1 or resume 12. It needs to be saved with your name. Otherwise, it's going to get lost in the huge folder of resumes that our recruiters are dealing with. The other thing I'll say is following up in 48 hours. And that really is a specific time frame. It doesn't have to be exactly by the second, of course, but really you want to follow up with the recruiter. Hopefully you've met them, talked to them, or at least have an idea of who that person is. You can follow up with that person and say, thanks so much for the information. I just sent an application in for fill in the name of the role. It's really helpful for them to get notified about your application and to reiterate your interest. Recruiters want to hire someone that wants the job. They want someone who's going to accept. So showing your interest is really, really important. All right, another mistake we see is applying too late. So what we mean by that, and I have some graphs here from the NACE, National Association of Colleges and Employers, showing the percentage of employers that are hiring in the fall versus the spring for full-time and intern. The vast majority of our recruiters are starting their process in the fall. That does not mean that there are no positions in the spring, but it certainly means that you can't be quite as picky. So we really want you to be focusing on this early. Some industries, like audit positions for the Big Four or Wall Street, for example, are recruiting even earlier in the spring before the year before. So it's really important to know what you're aiming for and have an eye on that early. Some applications are also rolling, so that means that they are going to take applications as they come in versus waiting for a specific deadline. We've also seen Capital One, for example, will open a position, they have an end date listed, and they actually end up closing early because they have so many applications. So it is really, really important that you apply early and you don't wait on this, especially if you're waiting for the perfect role or for your resume to be up to date. Make sure you're really getting all that in order quickly. So a couple tips. Setting up job alerts is number one. Again, if you're on Handshake, you can go straight to an employer site. So rather than searching in jobs, go to the top search bar and type in Capital One. Click on their page and you'll be able to set up an alert for that specific company. That's a really great way to make sure you don't miss these major applications. A lot of companies also have job alerts directly on their website. The other thing we really recommend doing is updating your resume proactively. So if you are getting involved in a club, don't wait until you're scrambling to come to Business Horizons to update your resume. Update it while you're in the club and while you're actively doing projects. Not only is that going to make sure you don't scramble and you're ready for job applications that open, it's also going to make sure your resume is much more accurate and much more detailed. So strongly recommend doing that. And then, of course, I'll probably plug us 20 more times before we're done today, but really do recommend meeting with Career Services either in the spring or the summer before your big, junior year or when you're looking for applications. It's going to be really, really important so that you're ready to go by the time applications open. All right, now some of you who are looking for internships, this is probably great, and you'll keep this in mind for next year. Some of you might already be looking for full-time, and so what I just said might be having you panic a little bit. Don't panic. There are still jobs out there. It is totally okay. But what it does mean, and I've said this already, it means that you need to be open-minded. It means that you can't be totally one track, because not every job is going to be available. Not every company is still going to be hiring. So I encourage you to keep an open mind. Your first job is likely not your forever job. We always say most grads will stay in their first job for about 12 to 14 months. I was in my first job for 13 months, so right on target. So it feels like a long time, but ultimately it's not going to be forever. So keep an open mind. Think about where that job can take you in the future. You might end up loving it and staying there forever. So, it's just going to be something that you have to take a step back and look at the overall big picture. The other thing I'd recommend is circling back to previous internships and positions that you held, see if they have any openings, particularly if you did really well in that internship and have kept in touch. And then I would also say that there are other ways to build your skills. So for example, if you're someone who is a finance major and you find yourself taking a sales position because that's what's available right now, we can absolutely meet with you and discuss other ways to build up your financial resume so that you could pursue finance in the future. There are opportunities. Some of them we'll talk about today. So I just want to kind of put that on your radar. The other thing is networking intentionally. So, networking is a bit of a long game, but in some ways, networking can really help you find additional opportunities that you're not finding on Handshake or on LinkedIn, the hidden job market, as we like to call it. So we're going to dive a little bit further into what that means. So what we see a lot of times is networking without the right goal in mind. So networking to ask for a job, or networking to kind of get them to know you and nothing further. So let me talk a little bit about what we mean when we say capitalize on that networking. Networking ultimately is to show that you have good character besides your resume. Looking at a piece of paper, you're never going to get a real sense of someone's personality and what they might be like as a coworker and an employee. So networking gets that across to the recruiter or across to the alum or whoever you're networking with. So who should I be networking with? We do recommend branching out from recruiters. We get a lot of questions about like, how do I get in touch with recruiters from companies? And that's fine. Attending events is the best way. But I will say alumni are going to be a really good bet when it comes to networking. And we'll talk a little bit about why. But first, I want to tell you where to find these people. So if you go into Handshake, hopefully you still have that up, underneath the events tab, underneath or above, there's a people tab. And this is new, but you can actually look into the people tab and find alumni and recruiters. So you can do a couple of things. You can filter by school and view recent grads and or students that have worked at certain companies. You can also filter by job title. So you can type in talent acquisition, or you can type in recruiter, and you'll find a number of people that fit that. Those people are great to then connect with on LinkedIn and start having some conversations and coffee chats. You can also just strictly use LinkedIn searches. You can look up alumni chapters. Something I didn't list here is you can come talk to Career Services. That's the 25th plug, but we do have connections with students we've worked in the past. And so if you're interested in a specific industry or company, we might have someone that we could set you up with to talk with. So highly recommend getting involved in a couple of different ways. So when we talk about what do I get out of networking, how do I network the right way? So what you want to do is use this as an information gathering opportunity. So you're not asking for a job. You're not asking, hey, can you give me a reference right out of the gate? You're going to initially start by asking questions like, what's the timeline for when you typically look for these roles? Do you know if there will be anything in the future that's in this category on this team? Do you have any tips for the interview? What does that look like? What skills have been most helpful to you? If you're an alumni, what certifications should I be thinking about? Maybe this person can be the person to say, hey, I know you're interested in this role, but I actually think this role would be a really good fit, and I'd love to get you to apply for that. So that's kind of where networking comes in handy. You have to ask the right questions. These people are not probably going to volunteer that information unless you're asking the right questions. So go in with questions, be prepared for a little bit of an interview, be prepared for doing lots of listening. But ultimately, you're looking to let them know that you're a normal, nice person. When we talked about you don't get a lot from looking at a resume, a piece of paper, it is a complete unknown when you hire a new person. And so if you've networked with someone and they can say, hey, I know Hannah, she's actually a nice person and I think would be a really good addition to the team, it goes a really, really long way. So how do we capitalize on these conversations? obviously asking the right questions, asking for feedback. You can also, once you've connected on LinkedIn, which you should always be doing if you connect with someone on Handshake or in person, you should like and support their content, make sure that you've shown that you're supportive and they remember your name. You can also attend all the events that they have on campus, and you should be doing that. A lot of our recruiters have told us it's the first thing they do when they're looking at applications. We're going to check and see, did this person attend our booth at Business Horizons? Did they come to our workshop that we hosted? So it's really important to stay connected once you've made that initial connection. You should also be sending a quick message once you apply. So whether that's the recruiter or the alumni, if they've helped you with the interview process, if they've helped you gather information, once you submit the application, send them another message to say, thanks so much for your time. I just applied. I really appreciate all your support. And that can really go a long way. And then, of course, keep a spreadsheet. Don't track of these connections. It's really hard to let them, or it's really easy to let them fall through the cracks because there's a lot, hopefully you're networking with a number of different people. So I would recommend just writing them all down and making sure you're tracking, hey, I haven't talked to this person in a while. Maybe I'll, go see what they're up to on LinkedIn, or see if they're hosting an event or something like that. Something else we learned from NACE is that 100% of our employers are using LinkedIn during the hiring process. Couple different reasons they use it. They might be using it for networking, they might be searching for candidates, or they might be checking profiles. It is very important that you have a LinkedIn, that your profile is up to date, and that you're using it to connect with people. You have a ton of people at your disposal to connect with. Our whole team, all your peers, all your professors, all the people that come to campus and speak in your classes. Really, really try to work that number up, especially if you're a younger student or if you're right in the thick of the job search process. It really does go a long way with recruiters. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about communication red flags because when it comes to networking on LinkedIn, they're going to see kind of how you interact with others and how you are communicating. So one red flag we've heard from recruiters a couple times is aggressive follow-ups. So that really means you should follow up once. Give it a week or two and then go ahead and follow up. After that, you need to let it lie. Recruiters are busy people. They may or may not get back to you. It kind of is what it is, but following up too aggressively can really turn them off. We've also heard from some recruiters, they don't like when students comment on their posts to get attention, like, hey, have you seen my message? Or hey, I just sent you a DM. They don't love that. So make sure you're just supporting. If you're interested in a role that they post, it's perfectly okay to say interested, something like that. But if you've already been connected with them, try to keep that just to genuine support. And then another one we've heard from recruiters is using all forms of communication at once. So if you send a LinkedIn message, email, and call them, that's a bit too much. I would pick one lane and go for it. I will say a connection on LinkedIn and an email, perfectly okay. Overly casual messaging is another red flag that they have mentioned. So the, text speak in a LinkedIn message, treat it like an email. I think that's really what they want to see. Over time, things may get more casual. If they're texting you, it may get more casual, but initially you'd rather be kind of like overdressed, overly formal versus the other way around. Something else they've mentioned, I'm interested in opportunities at your company as kind of the main message. It doesn't give them a lot to go off of. When you send a message, you need to be asking them for something very specific, something very reasonable for them to look up or share with you, but we don't want to make them do the work. We don't want to make them kind of pull teeth to get out what you're looking for. Go in with a very clear and reasonable ask. We also see some students who will share a really, really long email or message. Recruiters are busy people. Don't do that to them. Make sure it's really, quick and concise and to the point. You can always head to ChatGPT if you're someone who struggles with that. Hey, can you make this 5 to 6 sentences max? And it'll do that for you. If you're someone who's using your recruiter as Google, please don't. They're busy people. Always look it up first. If it's something that's on their website, they're going to expect you to be able to look it up on the website. If it's something that's in a previous email that they've sent, if it's something that's in the flyers that they handed out, always do your due diligence and try to look up the answer first. Ghosting after a recruiter already responds to you, they get really fired up about this. So if a recruiter responds to you, respond within the next 24 to 48 hours. Make sure that they're not waiting on you. They will move on. So ensure that you are getting back to them promptly. You're showing that you can stay on top of your emails. Communication is one of those basic skills that they're looking for in almost every job, if not every job. So make sure you can demonstrate that before the job actually starts. And then demanding feedback. This is something else that recruiters have mentioned, that students will often get frustrated when a recruiter can't give feedback. Most times they can't even share this, from their company's policy. So try not to be mad at them. It's just their company policy. I know it's frustrating. What would be better is if you came and talked to us and we can try to pinpoint where, we can improve for next time. All right, so let's talk about skills-based hiring. This is another area where we see a lot of students kind of missing the mark. 70% of entry-level employers incorporate skills-based hiring. So it is really, really prevalent right now in the job search process. But what does that mean for you, and how can you incorporate that into what you do? So skills-based hiring, what is it? Recruiters are essentially looking to determine, are your skills a match for this job, by writing really in-depth job descriptions that focus on the skills and the competencies. Sometimes they'll have interview rubrics. It's not typically something they'll share with you, but it is something they're using to see if you check off the different skills that they're looking for. Sometimes companies will send an assessment tool prior to kind of evaluate your soft skills or power skills. So that's something you want to be thinking about when you're looking through the different aspects of your job search. So what are the best ways to demonstrate your skills? Certifications are a really nice way. We'll talk a little bit about everything on this list. Certifications are a really nice way to showcase specific skills that the company is going to be looking for. Portfolios can be really helpful. We'll talk about job simulations. And then most importantly, using your resume and your interview to connect the skills that you've already got and already demonstrated from things like internship, experiential learning, part-time jobs, projects, and your leadership and clubs on campus. So we're going to dive into all this, but this is really where you want to think about not just listing out your accomplishments, but what are the specific skills in the job description and how do I incorporate that? So first step, identify both the soft, aka power skills, and technical skills from the job description. Take a moment to write those down. You can do that proactively, even if you're not applying for a specific job right now. You can go back to that data I shared on the first slide and look through a couple of job descriptions and identify, what are all financial analysts looking for? What are the skills that are typically involved in these positions, and how can I be thinking about that for the future? This is something else I wanted to share. So again, this is from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. This was interesting. So we basically, NACE polled both students and employers on a couple of different competencies, specifically communication, critical thinking, professionalism, and leadership. Students rank themselves much higher than employers rank themselves. So it's something to be mindful of. It doesn't necessarily mean that students don't have these skills, but it does mean that employers aren't seeing it. And so that's really where we want to focus. I listed out, I won't read all of them, but I listed out some of the desired skills that our Pamplin recruiters specifically have asked for. So thinking about, how can I demonstrate very specifically that I am quality in communication, in leadership, teamwork, critical thinking, etc. So starting with certifications, we do get a lot of students who ask, like, do I need them? That's typically money, it's typically time. No major in Pamplin requires a certification. All of our degrees are set up so that you can go into the job market and get a job as is. However, some of our recruiters are saying that certifications can be helpful in demonstrating specific skills, but they certainly don't want you to stack them unnecessarily. That really doesn't help, and it's just unnecessary money. So determine the focus. I will say cybersecurity employers are the ones that have the most opinions about this. So they recommended, several of our polled employers recommended the following, specifically CompTIA Security Plus, Azure, and AWS Cloud. I would definitely recommend choosing a lane early on, unless you've talked to specific recruiters who are asking you to get all three. It's really nice to have, again, not necessary, but it does help demonstrate skills, especially in something like cybersecurity when the job market is already so competitive. Portfolios. Okay, so this is something that not every student needs to consider, so I won't spend a ton of time on this. 27% of our employers think that portfolios are important. So there are certain majors that this is going to be important for. So if you're wanting to showcase technical abilities, again, if you're thinking back to cybersecurity, potentially DSS, but also creative positions, so marketing, digital marketing strategy in particular, everything that you personally have, so especially with creative positions, social media, things like that, is all going to be considered part of your portfolio. So one of the mistakes we've heard a lot from our recruiters is that a student will be wanting to get into social media, but yet their personal social media does not reflect the standard that the company is looking for. So it's really important that you think through everything that they might be seeing. So what we also see is students will essentially add in their college projects, which is fine. And that is a good way to start your portfolio. But a lot of times those projects are maybe a step behind what a company would be looking for a finished product. For example, a case study paper is probably not something that your company would use, but a case study paper turned into a report in a presentation style that you could give to a client, that would be something that a client could use and a company could use. So think through, what's the job description? What skill am I looking to showcase? And then how can I turn that into something tangible for my recruiters? And a lot of times you do have things you could work from your classes, but they need a little bit of tweaking and maybe a little bit of extra work. You want to make sure you're showcasing specific platforms, specific functions, specific results. Results typically mean numbers. So back to creative positions, if you're someone who created an email campaign and you want to show a screenshot of what that looked like, that's great, but also make sure you put the engagement numbers, how many opens, how many clicks, that's going to be what they want to see. Almost always, I would recommend including a writing sample. I mean, even for our technical students, communication is so key. So I would recommend a writing sample. I'd recommend having someone read it over. It's just best practice for a writing sample. It's not something you necessarily have to put in a whole paper for, but if you create a portfolio and you have an intro paragraph, that's a writing sample. So that's the kind of thing you should be thinking about to really show that you're a well-rounded candidate. And then where can you showcase this? The best way, I think, is a QR code on your resume, top right corner, and a link on your LinkedIn profile. That makes it really easy for recruiters to access. You could also, if you were talking with an alumni in a coffee chat, you could ask if they wouldn't mind looking it over and you could share with them, get some feedback, also be bragging subtly. So that's another great way to share it. I wanted to share this quote from a recruiter at Metaphase because I was talking to them at Business Horizons. Hopefully some of you got to chat with them at the career fair, but they really emphasize the importance of projects and portfolios. They want to see what you're doing. Resumes are great, but a lot of our students are getting similar degrees, which is the norm, but they want to see, what have you done above and beyond? What have you created that will show us not just that I took a class in Python, but that I can apply it and use it. All right, the next category is job simulation. So this is on one main platform. If you've met with any of our career advisors, you know that we love Forage. Forage is a job simulation site. There's a lot of information on Forage, but we typically recommend it just for the job simulations. It is completely free. It's a great way to demonstrate your experience. I think especially for a younger student who hasn't had an internship yet, this is a really good way to showcase that you can create and finish a project. The other thing is, you can see from this screenshot, this is real world companies that have put these projects on Forage. So if you are someone who's interested in PwC and you complete a project through Forage with PwC, you can add that to your resume and it'll probably be a good point for conversation or to showcase that you understand what's going on in the audit world in PwC. All right, so let's talk about interviewing. So this is what we talked about as the kind of one of the most important parts of showcasing your skills. And one of the biggest mistakes that we see Pamplin students make is talking in an interview about what you've done, but not necessarily connecting it to your skills. So something we see a lot is students who answer behavioral questions in the theoretical. So, you know, how have you dealt with a difficult situation in the past? Well, I would probably, you know, handle it in this way. And what we want is for you to show what you've concretely done. Don't get tripped up when a company asks the question in a way like, what would you do if you were to encounter a difficult situation or a different customer? They still don't want to hear theoretical. They still want to hear a concrete example. You can answer it in a way of, well, you know, in the past, this is what I've done. That's what they want to do. That's what they want to hear. The STAR of the STAR method. Hopefully you guys are familiar with the STAR method. If you're not, it stands for situation, task, action, and result. It's a really good way to frame your answer to ensure that you're focusing on skills. But what we see a lot of is students focusing on the situation. So my group project member broke his foot and he wasn't able to come, so we had to, you know, talk a lot with our professor. But I want you to focus more on the action and particularly the results. here's what I did. I decided to create a communication channel and set out a project management guideline for the rest of our group. Ultimately, in the end, we were able to, with a lot more detail. So ensure that you're spending a little bit of time on the S and a lot of time on the A and the R. And then connecting skills to business outcomes. This is another one we see a lot. If a recruiter says, so tell me about your experience with Excel. And you were to say, I've used Excel in my previous projects. It was in this business analytics class. That's fine. But what they want to hear is a little bit more detail. They want to hear specifically what functions you're capable of, the results of those functions, how comfortable you are. That's the skill they're looking to get at. So show them what you can do when they ask that question. Another thing we all often see, a mistake we see, is not translating your student organization experience into business language. So we see a lot of like, oh, I was treasurer of my club. And you'll meet with a career advisor and we're like, well, that's finance related. Why don't you share a little bit more about that? Change that into what would that look like if my student organization was a mini business, and then write the bullet point. You can also ask ChatGPT for help with this one too, but this is going to really help when you're answering interview questions because it'll showcase a little bit more of your in-depth skills. When we talked about 27% of employers like to see portfolios, 90% of employers believe interviewing is the most important way that a student can demonstrate their skills in skills-based hiring. So this is where we see a lot of students going wrong. The interview is a really, really important part because it's the first time they're seeing you off paper. So think about the skills aspect, really make sure you're connecting what you're saying to the skills that are in the job description. When you leave the interview, they should be really comfortable that you know everything and can speak to everything in that job description. So let's dive into a little bit of situational interview questions. I'm not sure how many of you have seen situational interview questions, but they are going to be a behavioral question that's a bit more specific. So continue to use the STAR method. Continue to prepare stories and experiences from your past that touch on these. Don't talk about the theoretical, but they're going to be questions that dive into more specific functions and probably something very related to your major. So if they were to ask you something like, your director wants to improve departmental margins, how would you build a profitability model? They don't necessarily want to hear your theoretical thoughts. They want to hear, well, this is the function that I have taken in the past when I've worked on similar projects. So naturally, if we, put it into this context, I would blah, blah, blah. So you want to make sure you're still speaking from tangible experiences. Don't be afraid to ask qualifying questions, clarifying questions for more data, for more information. Obviously, you are the interviewee, but you absolutely can ask. I think sometimes they want you to ask qualifying questions because they want to know that you understand the question enough to know which questions to ask. And then, of course, talk thoroughly through your answer. They want to see how you think. They want to see what you're sharing. So make sure that you are talking through the answer completely. A real recruiter tip that I had recently, the sales interview, so if you're a sales student and you're interviewing, often is the situational interview question, if that makes sense. So the whole interview is a chance to see your sales skills. So if you don't make a strong pitch at the end and clearly state why you want the job, they're going to see that you aren't totally comfortable with that. So it's really important to think about that if you're a sales student. All right, case interviews. We do see a lot of case interviews for our students as well. So what we're going to focus on is kind of the framework of how to answer them. So first things first, you want to identify the objective. Secondly, you want to think about what information data do I need to correctly answer this question. You'll, of course, clean and validate the data depending on what you're working with. And then you'll apply either a formula, a model, or a framework. This is really broad, and I know that, but there are a lot of different types of case interview questions that you could be asked depending on your major. Always, when you're presenting back, you want to talk about the risks and the trade-offs. This is a really important step. There's almost always going to be a risk or, a downside to the path that you've chosen, the framework that you've chosen. So make sure you understand that and talk through it. And then communicate your recommendation. Describe how you would not only communicate your recommendation in this interview, but how you would do it in a real world setting. How would you go about communicating what you've recommended to leadership in a company? Some real tips for our case interviews: use AI to generate realistic questions. So if you share with them the job description, share with AI the job description, and share your resume, it should be able to come up with a couple of really good realistic questions that you can then practice. It can get as in-depth as you need. If you need a data set, it should be able to generate that as well. You can also ask for your recruiters for more details and prep info. So if you're someone who's not sure whether this is going to be a case interview or whether it's going to be a situational interview or behavioral, ask more questions. If it's a case interview, ask them for, do you have anything you recommend to prepare? And they should be able to share some information with you. All right, something else we see in interviews is a personality assessment. Some companies do require this as part of their pre-screening. Do not wait more than 1 to 2 days. I talk to a lot of students who wait like a week or two, especially if there's a given deadline, but it's really going to be beneficial to take it as soon as you receive it, within 1 to 2 days. There's not really anything to study for, so there shouldn't be a ton of time that you need to prepare for something like this other than looking through the competencies and the power skills listed on the job description. Of course, a lot of them go without saying: teamwork, communication, but you want to see what they're emphasizing and make sure that you relate to that. My best advice here, though, is to work towards truly building these competencies that you're seeing in job descriptions, because your answers should be realistic and real for you, and it will be easiest to do that if you really focus on building those competencies in your everyday life. I'm not going to read through these, but I did want to share a couple of examples from PwC's assessment that they share with students during the preparation stage. They're basically asking about how you handle different situations. You want to be honest. That's really, really important. They want a true evaluation from you, but a lot of students get tripped up here because they're not familiar with the types of competencies that a student is looking for. So spend some time on that before you take personality assessments. All right, let's wrap up the interview section with some red flags that our recruiters have shared with us. In an interview, please do not refer to the role as temporary or a stepping stone. If you feel that way, that's fine. Things can change, but recruiters don't want to hear that. They do not want to hear you say, well, I think this role will just be temporary and I'm hoping in 2 years to move on to law school or whatever it might be. They don't want to hear that. So focus on the now, focus on why you're interested in this role. They don't like when students talk in generalities. So this is kind of the theoretical we talked about. So if they were to say, tell me about a time that you've stepped into a leadership role. Well, I'm usually the leader in a group work. They don't want to hear that. They want a very specific example and how that went for you. So keep that in mind. They really, really don't want to see students who are reading answers or sounding super scripted. So I'll just tell you, I've done a lot of mock interviews, a lot of our career advisors have. It is really quite obvious when a student is reading answers. If you've pre-prepared your tell me about yourself, practice that until you can say it naturally, because it is so obvious and it really turns recruiters off. So make sure you're not doing that. And then if you're also someone who just sounds scripted, I know that's hard because that just might be how you talk, but it is going to be a red flag for a recruiter. So practice talking about it. Do a mock interview. Our career advisors can be honest with how you sound and if that's sounding natural, but make sure that it sounds like a genuine answer that you're coming up with in the moment. Most often, recruiters do not allow the use of AI in an interview. Using AI to support your resume writing, to support different aspects of practice is fine, but using AI in the actual interview, even if it's a higher view, is not a good idea. It's not typically allowed and can be a major red flag. And then not thanking them afterward. If they have 2 candidates in the final round and one candidate thanks them and the other does not, it's going to be a big deal. So make sure you're thanking them. I like to say within 48 hours, send them a thank you email. It doesn't have to be huge, but just connecting something you talked about can be really, really helpful. Okay, we're going to dive into resumes and how that can be connected to skills-based hiring. So first step to making your resume skills focus is to remove the power skills, soft skills section from your skills section. So if you have a section under skills that says teamwork, communication, public speaking, etc., take that out. What I want you to do instead is focus on where and how you've demonstrated these skills in the past. So for example, public speaking, if you have spoken at previous chapters with your sorority, fraternity, that can be a really good way to showcase that. Use specific examples and always make sure to include numbers when possible. It's possible more than you think. And that's another great thing to ask ChatGPT for help with, or your career advisor for help with. Adding a project section is another really, really good way. We see a lot of students who don't think that they can add a project section, but you absolutely can. Relevant coursework is fine, but it's going to look pretty similar to most of your peers, whereas projects are going to be really specific to you. That can be course projects, but then it can also be some personal projects. Some of the ones we see a lot are investing, social media, a creative website, things like that. Again, always including numbers, metrics, and results. And don't just write a description of the tool you created or the website you created. Think about the skill that you're looking to communicate and what that looks like in your project. All right, and then writing skills-focused bullet points. You guys have probably heard this before, so I won't spend too much time here, but your bullet points should not read like a job description. You want to think about what skill do I want them to know that I have by the time they finish reading this bullet point. So I always like to say the PARQ method. You're going to think about your power verb, your action skill, your results, and then you're going to always go back and quantify. That's going to be how you really showcase this. So for example, created shows creativity and problem solving as your soft skills, and then thinking through public speaking, leadership, written communication, all that can be packed into your bullet point versus, help with onboarding new members. That's going to be a big difference in the skills that they know about you after this bullet point. Okay, and then quickly, I like to touch on applicant tracking systems and resume. This is a major mistake that can take you out of the running just so easily, and it's an easy one to fix. I understand that the resume on the right does aesthetically look better, but recruiters want the boring resume. They want the black and white, top down. ATS systems are the same. They cannot read a resume with 2 columns. They cannot read pictures. They can't read text box. It's really no good and can take you out of the running so early. So lots of things that we want to make sure we don't use. Using AI too heavily can trigger ATS. So make sure you don't include that. No funky fonts, no colors, etc. You can basically copy and paste your resume into a plain text document. If that doesn't look right, then you know that your original document needs some work. We also have something at the university called VMOC, which can double check your resume against ATS standards. If you just look up Virginia Tech and VMOC, you should be able to find that, and it will flag everything that wouldn't work in an ATS system. So that can be a good way to check as well. Okay, coming up towards the end here, just some last what recruiters wish you would stop doing. They've told us this directly. We want to share it with you so that you don't make these same mistakes. We talked about aggressive follow-up, so I won't spend too much time there. Renegs, even with another company, it's not a good look. It burns bridges. It's really, really important that we avoid this. If you're someone who's getting yourself into a situation where you have an offer and something else on the table, please come talk to us. We can help you navigate it. We can help craft emails, whatever you need, but we want to avoid this at all costs. Of course, you've probably heard this since you were in high school, unpolished or overly opinionated social media posts. That does go for LinkedIn as well. Weak professional recommendations are a big red flag. They really wish that students would stop asking people that don't know them super well and they haven't put the time in with a relationship. This is a big one, stretching the truth in a screening question. So are you interested in a manager role? And the student's like, yes, of course, that's what I'm interested in. And maybe that's not their long-term goal. It doesn't serve anyone. If you're someone who is going to come back and say, you know what, actually, I'm not interested in a manager role, just be honest up front. They might be able to find something else for you. They might be able to put you in touch with someone else. Really take the screening questions as an important part of the interview. You can ask questions yourself, you can share future goals, and you can always align your goals with this company, but straight up adjusting the truth, I'll call it, is not a good idea. And then applying for things you're truly not interested in, it really, again, is just a time saver for you and the recruiter. So recruiters really wish you would start, having conversations with the recruiting team. If you like this company, but that role is not something you're interested in, talk to the recruiter. They can help put you in touch with something else. They can maybe give some suggestions, or maybe they can highlight aspects of the role that you are interested in. But applying for something that you know you're not going to take in the long run is just not a really respectful way to go about it, and ultimately doesn't serve you either. All right, that was rapid fire, you guys. There was so much to cover today. I would love to connect with you all one-on-one. Our team would love to connect with you all. We touched on a lot of things that we see, but at a high level. There's so much we need to dive into depending on your specific situation. So please come talk to us, especially if you're someone who was sharing your struggles in the beginning. We would love to help you with that a little bit more one-on-one. So I've got a QR code at the bottom. I've got our contacts information. All of us would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. And if you haven't already checked in, please make sure you do that. I will stay on just another minute or so. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you all so much for spending the hour with me. I really appreciate it.